gained another 50,000 people, but apparently that wasn't good enough.
We're just focused on doing the most Melbourne show we can.
That doesn't really affect us.
Let's just push through it, right?
Melbourne!
Then Chelsea Handler will come in. Is she coming in?
No, Zoom, I think.
What a piece of shit show this is.
Melbourne Radio Wars.
The storm is coming, but I'm prepared.
We'll win.
We will win.
I'll be gone for a while, but don't be scared.
Good afternoon. My name is Kingsley, and I'm here to tell you about a market in Australia that pretty much, as Anders said, overnight changed the dynamics and is actually getting a lot of people talking about radio, which is fantastic. We love that. We call it the Melbourne Radio Wars because that is the name of the podcast that I'm one of the hosts with. I do have other hosts that couldn't be here with me, and I'm representing them. So all the thoughts you're going to see today are not only mine, but from them as well. From left to right, we have Craig Bruce. Craig is an international radio consultant, works a lot with talent, particularly talent coaching, and he also does executive producing of podcast talent. So he spends a lot of time working with personalities and has had a long career in programming. Irene Hume started as an announcer and a music director, but now is a very senior music strategist and does a lot of work in helping music-based radio stations with their programming and playlists. Dom Evans, he's kind of like the fifth Beatle in our podcast. You don't hear him in the podcast, but he's responsible for all the sound design and also gives us advice on programming and production from his many years as a producer, and he produced that opener that you heard before. And then myself, and my background is, while it's content, but I also have spent a lot of time in the marketing and sales arenas of radio brands as well. So that's us. Our podcast called Melbourne Radio Wars is something we release every Saturday morning because there's always something happening in radio. We started thinking, will we have enough material to do a weekly podcast? And now we're at the stage of thinking, well, maybe we could do it 2 times a week because there's lots of things happening all the time. Even when I was sitting in that last session, a news story has broken that will make our podcast for the next episode. So that's a nice tease to get you to have a listen to the episode this week. What we try and do with our podcast is try and take you inside the strategy behind what you're hearing on the radio. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And in fact, our favourite reference that we've had someone tell us about our podcast is it's like someone left the door open in a strategy meeting. So all of us are talking about the strategies of these radio stations and brands, and then we've left the door open so you can hear what we're talking about. And we are 100% authentic and honest. None of us work for these radio stations, and based on what we're saying, we probably won't be working for these radio stations in the future either. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what the Melbourne radio market is like. That won't take too long, but most importantly for this session, I'd love you to think about a situation that you have a show or a brand in, or a radio station, and what lessons you can take from there that you could apply to your market, also could apply to your brand. But first, let me set the scene. So you need to know who the players are. Who are these people that are competing with each other in the Melbourne Radio Wars? Really what it is it's a CHR, or contemporary hit radio battle. There are lots of radio stations in Melbourne, but the ones that we like to focus on for our podcast, and we think it's the most interesting story, is the fact that there are 3 radio stations all fighting for the same audience. Effectively, we have KISS from a radio company called ARN. We have Fox from a different radio company called SCA, or Southern Cross Stereo. And we have Nova 100 from the radio company called Nova Entertainment. And all of them are broadly targeting 25, 54-year-old people, and mostly women. They skew very slightly to women, but not overall. And in terms of market size, you can see the Australian market size for Melbourne is about 4.8 million, so it is the largest radio market in Australia now. It always used to be Sydney, but Melbourne's population growth has meant that Melbourne has taken over. And then in terms of the audience targeting the 25-54s, you can see that it's about half of that total. So it's a very substantial piece of the puzzle, which means a lot of advertising dollars do follow the ratings. So the ratings become very important. So that's the landscape, that's the battle that we focus on. How did we get here? How did this start? Well, these numbers might surprise you, but in November last year, Kyle and Jackie O, who are a morning radio show on ARN, on KISS, signed a new 10-year deal, supposedly worth $200 million. Now, depending on who you talk to, we think that could be a little bit lower because we understand they've got lots of share options in the company as well. So their ability to earn more than that would be huge. But we think in Australian dollar terms, it's around about $10 million each to do a morning radio show, which is money that has never been invested that heavily before. So it's a really big strategy bet by ARN that the Kyle and Jackie O show will continue to deliver great ratings as it has for their Sydney-based audience in the past. So with that contract signing came one big change in Australian radio. Kyle and Jackie O wanted to take their show national. So there are 5 major markets in Australia, and the second market after Sydney is Melbourne. And they had never been heard on Melbourne breakfast before. So this is the first time a Sydney breakfast show was going to be networked into Melbourne, which is a very important thing to remember. So there was an existing show called Jace and Lauren, and Jace and Lauren were told, we're really sorry, but we're bringing Kyle and Jackie O here, so we're going to end your employment with ARN. Now, what happened next was really interesting because their competitor, Nova 100, picked up Jace and Lauren and put them on their morning show. So immediately there was a show that had started to see a little bit of success be taken off the air and put on another brand. Kyle and Jackie O then came into Melbourne, and what you can't read in the small print, but I think over time will become very bigger print, is that they had a 7-week head start. So Jason and Lauren go from Kiss to Nova. They start 7 weeks before Kyle and Jackie O start in Melbourne. And as you'll see from the results, that's played a very big part in what happened next. So let me just introduce you to the shows. Now with the Kyle and Jackie O show, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's not for the faint-hearted, is probably the best way I would describe it. It is an acquired taste. For me to even try and find a piece of audio that I can play for you in a forum such as this is very difficult. It involved a lot of editing. So what I found was a news report that went out on television the day that Kyle and Jackie O started in Melbourne. Again, content warning. This is a very mild version of Kyle and Jackie O you're about to hear, but let's have a listen.
Well, he is loud, he's brash, and he's trying to dominate the country's radio ratings with his unique broadcasting style. This morning, the Kyle and Jackie O show launched in Melbourne in their bid for global domination.
After months of build-up, Kyle Sandilands and Jackie Henderson's big day has arrived.
The day of the revolution, the beginning of the 20-year dream of going national.
Their Kiss FM show playing all their classic hyper-sexualised hits to a new Melbourne market.
You're a massive homo. Have you ever had sex with a paparazzi? You got a tiny penis?
Yes, I've got a very tiny penis.
Melburnians had thoughts.
Do you think they will go down well in Melbourne?
I do.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah, Kyle's funny. Yeah.
I don't listen to Kyle and Jackie O. I don't love what they do.
They kind of teeter on the edge of going too far.
They are super opinionated, very jarring. I don't think it's probably going to gel well with the Melbourne vibe.
I'm a fuel-guzzling, ex-F-boy, coke-sniffing asshole. That's what I am.
I won't listen to that. Because we just don't need it.
Kyle and Jackie dominate Sydney radio with an audience of around 850,000 listeners and each earning roughly $10 million per year.
See you later, loser.
But valued at around $220 million, Melbourne is Oz Radio's most lucrative market. And it's got 2.3 million breakfast radio listeners that Kyle is now officially trying to win over.
There's no way in the world this won't work. There'll be plenty of people that will hear the show and will absolutely love it, and there will be just as many that will be repulsed. Well, maybe not just as many. I guess that's the math they're trying to do.
When he's not guzzling fuel or sniffing things, Kyle can court controversy. He's breached broadcasting standards and offended the country on several occasions. Fat shaming, labelling the Paralympics horrific, inadvertently pressuring a 14-year-old into revealing she'd been raped, and making offensive comments towards gay men.
The monkeypox, the big gay disease floating around. It's only the gays getting it.
Kiss owners ARN Media are spending between $4 and $6 million launching the duo into Melbourne. We think at least $1 million went into this cake they sent us.
Kyle has no intention of picking an AFL team. He's not going to ride a tram. And if they can win without having any Melbourne reference points on their show, then really everything changes from a radio perspective.
Okay, so trust me when I say that was the cleanest audio and video clip I could find to play. Oh, you should hear it every morning when it's on. It's equally car crash radio that you can't listen to, that you don't want to miss, and also that you don't want to listen to most of the time. So why I bring that example up first is because we think the Melbourne Radio Wars is really a breakfast battle, which is where obviously a lot of radio battles are. So we have Kyle and Jackie O on KISS, we have Jason and Lauren on Nova 100 now, they've switched stations, and then we have Fifi, Fev and Nick, and we think all of them are very world-class talent. Kyle is doing the show that he's always done with Jackie O. He is exactly as you see him, that's how he goes. He doesn't change for anyone. He didn't even change the show at all to bring into a new market in Melbourne, despite the fact the market size is larger than Sydney. So now you've had a taste of Kyle and Jackie O, it would only be fair that I give you a taste of some of the other shows. And before we get into this next clip, you should know that this is probably the best idea I've heard on Australian radio this year, and it's from Fifi, Fev and Nick at the Fox.
There's the camera down there. Give it a wave.
That was sick. Underdogs. Everybody ready to go out there on the field too? Yeah! There's just one member of the team we haven't met yet, and they're a very important member of the team. What happens if you're out there playing footy and you get thirsty? What do you need? Water guy. You need a water guy. Would you like to meet your water guy? Yeah! Please welcome Andy.
The water boys arrived, everybody. Yes. I've got still. I've got sparkling. I've got glacial water. What kind of water would you like?
Normal.
Normal. And for you?
Normal.
Normal. And for you?
Sparkling.
Okay, great.
This is such a special night. The stadium is going to be full of screaming supporters. They're not here to see Carlton. Nah. They're not here to see Port Adelaide. Who are they here to see? All you kids are the best kids we could pick. So don't worry about the bullies. Don't worry about people that don't let you play, because none of those kids are here tonight. None of them are running on Marvel Stadium, are they? No! Are we going to win? Yeah! Are we going to have fun? Yeah! Are we all going to play together? Yeah! Why are we going to do it? Because who are we? The Underdogs! Let's go!
He told me that the kid should rip his glasses off his face and snap them.
He completed something like 833 days of chemo.
Wow. I've never seen anyone more crushed and broken.
You're officially one of Fifi, Fev and Nick's underdogs!
Yes, great. Very well deserved. Quite the contrast from what you heard with the Kyle and Jackie O show, but they're two shows that know exactly what they're about. Kyle and Jackie O do the relationship content, And Fifi Fev and Nick are very Melbourne focused, and they do things such as that, helping bullying kids be able to have a good time at the football. Very stealable idea. That is just opening up the phones, asking for kids in your audience that may have had a chance to get a second chance. That's exactly what they did, and it was very good. Okay, so what are the results? Now, I'll be cautious here and say what are the results so far, because we have 8 radio surveys a year in Australia, and Kyle and Jackie O have only been fully in one of the 8 surveys, but have been on air a bit longer. So we can start to see some trend lines. Now, if you're wondering which show is winning so far, it's the one you haven't heard from yet. It's Jason Lauren on Nova. So if you have a look at some of the news headlines from the time, it basically is Jason Lauren were given the boot, said goodbye, picked up by Nova, and lo and behold, they've gone to the top of the ratings, and all of a sudden the media is on riding that wave as well. Headlines such as Jason Lauren gets sweet revenge, Kyle and Jackie O crash and burn. So typical tabloid kind of responses. We know obviously that things can ebb and flow from a ratings and a survey perspective. We don't expect Kyle and Jackie O to stay where they are. They will certainly grow over time, and they've got 10 years to do it in. So it is a long game, but the short-term results look like this. This is how it got reported, and this is where you'll get a taste of Jace and Lauren as well.
The latest radio ratings have dropped, and it seems for all their confidence, Kyle and Jackie O are still off the pace in Melbourne. The much-hyped Sydney duo only managed to place 5th in FM Breakfast. The hosts they replaced shot to number 1. They're happy about it. Gracing us now is the king and queen of radio, is Jason Lauren. Hi, guys. Oh, guys, congratulations. How's the adrenaline?
Look, we got so excited this morning. We popped some champagne right at 9 o'clock, and then in true rock star fashion, I took myself off to bed at midday for a midday nap.
And, and I came home, it's my wife's birthday, and I said, guess what, babe? We've got to clean the house. The project are coming over. And you can imagine how that went down. So that was a reality check.
Well, you know, it's like a plot from a movie. How incredible has the comeback journey been?
It's been really overwhelming. Like when Nova picked us up, and they've been fantastic. They reached out, and like Lauren can be a testament to. I was a mess at the end of last year, because you guys know what this industry's like. To get a team where you all get along so well and you're so proud of the products you're putting out, it is so rare in this industry. So for me, I was gutted. I just felt like we were just getting started.
Yeah, and I think we thought the fairy tale for us was getting a second chance and going to Nova. So today is just like a little cherry on top. And look, we were pretty graceful in defeat. We accepted the fact we'd been replaced by what we told was a much better product than us. And, you know, being told you're not good enough puts a little bit of fire in your belly sometimes. So today's been a really nice day for us to get to number 1 and to celebrate with the team.
And people have been fantastic. Like, we've been so overwhelmed. People have come up the street and say, hey, we followed you guys over to Nova, and that is not lost on us.
You get up too early to be motivated by vengeance. Do you know what I mean? You just have to concentrate on doing the best show you can do for your listeners. But still, it must feel quite gratifying that Kyle and Jax are in 5th place.
We've always just run our own race, haven't we? That's our thing. I feel like everyone else is talking about this Melbourne Radio War and, oh, look what they're doing, look what you guys... We've just done our own thing. We're like, you guys go to war and make a big thing of it. We're just going to focus on what we're doing.
Yeah, we've tried to run our own race and stick in our own lane, and we, you know, we haven't been able to compete with some things. I think at one point some shows are giving away $200,000 at a time, and we were going and meeting people and giving them $50 for a handshake. But it seems to be paying off.
Guys, in every war there's a battlefield, there's war strategies. Kyle and Jackie O, for instance, they had a branded bus show up at your events when you're doing outside broadcasts. Have you had any communication with them now?
Last survey, Kyle reached out and messaged us today. No, I haven't heard anything from them, but, you know, we chat. Like, the industry's pretty tight. It's like you guys, you know, you talk to other people in TV and stuff. Haven't heard from them today.
Do you guys have any words for your competitors? Any SmackDown talk?
Oh, that could be you. You're the dirty talker.
Oh, no, I'm not. These hands are for pushing
not that kind of dirty talk.
Well, guys, congratulations. We really do. It's such a wonderful story. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having us, guys.
All right, everyone get out of my house. Come on, please. World's colliding.
You got to wrap it up. Thanks, guys.
Okay, so very friendly, likeable pair that were tossed aside so cruelly and callously, and then picked up. And so you can see why there's a hero story coming through this. As one of the presenters said, it's very much a fairy tale. Okay, last piece on this, and then I'll tell you what you can learn from the war so far. So this is what the ratings look like. As I said, there are 8 surveys a year done by GfK in Australia. And the blue line is Fox, the red line is Nova, and the purple line is KISS. And this is the overall cume, so the cuming audience to the radio stations. So we've got sort of 1.3 million to Fox, around about 1.2 and a bit for Nova, and KISS has slid down a little bit in the last surveys across this time period. So the story here is that KISS actually had the number 2 cume, and they've changed, and now they're consistently 3rd so far. On breakfast, the cume looks a little bit different because you can see the red line is Jason Lauren. They've basically taken a lot of audience that they had and moved them straight across to Nova, which is why that 7-week gap where Kyle and Jackie O weren't on air yet could prove quite telling, because it allowed Jason Lauren to take that audience with them. And basically the Fox cume in breakfast is starting to trend down a bit, and we'd call that one for KISS pretty flat. Still room for them to improve. And the breakfast share, so the percentage share. So I can tell you there are probably another 8 radio stations we can put on this slide. Some are doing better, some aren't doing as well, but the ones we're focused on for our podcast are these 3, because this is where the interesting battle is. And you can pretty much see that KISS breakfast hasn't really improved with Kyle and Jackie O yet, and Jason Lauren have taken that audience. So that's what's happening in the Melbourne Radio Wars. But most importantly, so what? What can you take away from that you might be able to find yourself in a strategy session yourself, and you're thinking about how to compete and things that you can do? So let's go with 5 things you can learn, and I'll leave them on the screen long enough that you can take screenshots or notes if you like. And then we've got some comments that we've made on our podcast about the battle. The very first thing might seem obvious now, but probably didn't at the time, particularly to ARN, is that you remove long-term personalities or teams at your peril. So if you have a show that is on, or a personality that is on, and you're not sure, triple, quadruple check to see if people like them. Because there's a chance that maybe there's an audience for them that aren't quite passive, aren't as active in supporting them or promoting them. Maybe they don't attract a huge social media following. Maybe people are just happy with them. But watch what happens when you take them away, and then people will say, wait a minute, we were really happy with that show, what did you do? So this is partly a research question, but also think about other ways you can gather intelligence about what your audience is saying about the product you've got. And sometimes you have to go deeper than just the surface level research, because the surface level research might be telling you something like, Jason Lauren, they're okay, we like them, but you don't want to run the risk of removing something that could be potentially on the cusp of working really well, which is what happened. Number 2, marketing doesn't solve every problem that you have. Product is always where it starts, of course. And in Kyle and Jackie O's scenario, what they have spent, we know from what they've reported, is over $3 million in marketing. We think it's a little bit more than that now. And a lot of it has been on TV, outdoor, digital placements, making sure that the Melbourne audience knew that Kyle and Jackie O were there. The potential misstep is that they invited the audience to make up their own mind. So the insight they could be thinking about with this campaign was, when people hear the show, it's not as bad as they've heard about it. So maybe it's a bit negative you hear from people, but when you listen, it's actually okay. And that does have some truth to it, because there are certainly parts of Kyle and Jackie O's show which are good. The trouble is, there's a lot of the sexualised content that goes out in breakfast time in Melbourne, and by inviting people to make up their own mind, we would say perhaps people came and they did make up their own mind and they don't like it. So you've got to be careful about the proposition that you're putting forward, because all the money in the world perhaps doesn't help when you're working off the wrong insight. And so our thought on this is marketing needs to have a clear job to be done that aligns with what the most important strategic challenge is. So maybe they thought the most important challenge is when people hear it, they'll like it. However, the product has certainly not helped the marketing, because the product, we would say, has become more down that path of a bit more sexualised and pretty over the top, even for Kyle and Jackie O, and that's saying something. Number 3, it's really important when you're changing strategy or looking at strategy that you manage expectations. Now, this is internally, not only in the content team, but in the sales team if you have one, in the wider station, but also externally with the press. So Kyle takes no prisoners. He is someone who says what he thinks at every turn. He started in Melbourne by saying, "We will be number one." And maybe he'll be right, but it might take a bit longer than the media headlines have the appetite for, because the ratings at the moment suggest the opposite. So we think it's better just to be more quietly confident than perhaps noisily incorrect. And it especially applies for things with your sales and trade marketing. For anyone who's got a sales team, you will know they are your best trade marketing channel. No matter what you place in agency websites or in agency publications to try and convince them to buy advertising, what your sales team are hearing one-to-one is the early call on what's actually happening. And the sales team in ARN in Melbourne would have gone out and said, "This is going to be great, it's the end of boring radio, everything's going to be big." And I wonder what feedback they're getting now. Number 4 is someone will go hungry. So when you're fighting over the same audience, there may not be enough to go around. So remember, these 3 stations are effectively fighting over the same audience. Although it's sizable, what happens is when one show or station gets momentum, as Nova has at the moment with Jason Lauren, then all of a sudden more advertising dollars can flow their way, purely based on the headlines that you start to see and the news coverage you start to see. So really, in terms of audience, you really want to think about what your own niche or angle is that you can build from. For example, with Kyle and Jackie O, our point of view at the moment is they're probably more of a male-focused breakfast show. Now, their targeting on their ratings suggests it's not that. But the opportunity based on the content and based where there might be some cume audience flowing around is there was a short window to perhaps tap into a male-based audience and target them through performance metrics at the moment. That might be really interesting. So don't think 25-54 is the whole prize. Find a nice slice in there that you go, if we go a little bit harder on these ones, maybe we'll get a different result. And the last one, friends who are funny still wins on breakfast radio. That's a great sign, I think, that it still does. Because we want to go to podcasts for our content that we're really interested in. If we're really interested in scuba diving, then I'll find every scuba diving podcast I can find. I'm not interested in scuba diving, by the way, as an example. But I'll keep going and finding those things, and I'll go really deep, pardon the pun, I'll go really deep on trying to find as much information as I can. But for broadcast, when we're trying to attract a huge number for reach, to be able to monetize that audience, then you probably have to think about who would our audience most like to spend time with? Now, you've just seen an example from all 3 of shows, and I'm thinking your answer is probably going to be either Jace or Lauren or Fifi, Fev and Nick. That's not to say Kyle and Jackie O aren't entertaining and they don't have an audience, because they do, and they're number 1 FM in Sydney. But when you think about what makes radio really work, and we heard in the last session about companionship and loneliness, some people just like to have good company. And 2 of the 3 shows are really good company at the moment, and the closer you have those people on the air, the more likely you are to success. Okay, so that's 5 things to think about. Here are some battle plans. So let's assume for a moment Kyle and Jackie are not coming to Kuala Lumpur. I can confirm that. They're trying to take over Australia. They probably want to take over the world, but they definitely go to North America before they came to Asia. So I think you're safe for a while. But let's say that you have a battle plan ready to go, because you might find yourself in a situation where you are one of these 3. Maybe you're the market leader. Okay, what should be our battle plan to retain that market leadership? Maybe you're an existing show, but you're being moved into a new market. So you've had some good chemistry on the show, or if you're programming that station, you've got a team that exists and you're bringing them to your market for the first time. And the third plan, maybe we've got the same show, it's exactly the same show, but they're on a new station. So they've moved from one station to the other. So let's start with battle plan A. And this is where I ask my co-hosts on the podcast to give us their thoughts on what the strategy should look like. And again, I'll leave these on the screen long enough for you to take some screenshots for. So you're the market leader. So Craig says you need to aggressively defend and protect every element of the breakfast show and the brand that has made your station a market leader. The key is to know which battles you are prepared to fight for. So this is a targeting exercise internally. There'll be lots of things that you could say, we're famous for all of these things, but which ones are we prepared to fight for? Because when the battle starts, you need to focus your energy on those things. There'll be lots of distractions. And we would say early in the Melbourne battle, Fifi, Fev and Nick got very distracted by what was happening on Kyle and Jackie O and started to do some of their content. The trouble is they're not as good at that content as Kyle and Jackie O are. They were taking someone on at their own game. What's happened in more recent times is they've refocused the breakfast show on the things that they can win, and that's where you get ideas like underdogs and other Melbourne-based feel-good activities. Irene says, a new competitor can be exciting new and shiny. It's important to continually evolve your show, keeping it fresh and surprising. So continually evolve doesn't mean evolution. Sorry, it means evolution, not revolution. You want to evolve some of the pieces you've got to make them bigger, make them more palatable to a bigger audience, not to change strategy completely. And then think about what that means in terms of keeping it fresh and surprising. What's something you've always done and it's worked really well, but how can we freshen it up a little bit so we get the familiarity that people love, but it's starting to feel like new content against a competitor who may be all new content to your audience. Dom says, be careful not to walk away from what got you there in the first place. Continue to play to your strengths and do what you do best and what you're famous for. Trying to beat another show at their own game can risk your show coming across as disingenuous and confused. And as I said, that was our feeling for what Fifi, Fev and Nick were doing. And what I said, this is weird, I'm quoting myself to me. Use your existing audience to your advantage. You likely have a large social media following which you can use to your advantage. Owned media channels will continually provide the best return on investment because you know these people are already further down the marketing funnel. So basically, if you have a channel beyond broadcast that you are communicating with your audience with regularly, go harder on that. The owned channels such as your website and social media channels are going to be the best return on investment because once you've got them set up and you're producing organic content, then a good way to do that is to keep going on that path and do more of it. Focus in on that. So that's if you're the market leader. If you're an existing show, but you're in a new market, so you're working with a team that has existed and you've brought them to a market, here's some things to think about. Craig says, the biggest mistake Kyle and Jackie O have made is to show little or no respect to their new listener base. Once you've built a bond and level of trust with them, you can then take them on a broader content journey. But the first phase of a new market, the core listener has to be the primary focus. So Kyle and Jackie O are unapologetically doing their show, and so they should. It's their show, and it's been very successful in Sydney. The risk they've got is it's not connecting to Melbourne audiences because it doesn't feel to a Melbourne audience like it's their breakfast show. It might work in an afternoon drive time, much better than when it would in breakfast. And a great example happened in Melbourne on Monday. I was just flying up here and arrived, and there were cyclonic winds in Melbourne. Now, Melbourne is very fickle with its weather at the best of times, but there was winds equivalent to a Category 3 cyclone. Schools were closed, governments were telling people stay home, don't go into the office today, and Kyle and Jackie O spent no time on that topic. They would say we did it in the news, but you compare it to what the other shows were doing and they were very much covering school closures and these things that mean a lot to a Melbourne audience. Irene says, everything you do should serve as an opportunity to reinforce the images you want to own and be famous for. Find ways of building a connection with the audience off the air too. One show I know of has a WhatsApp group with listeners to keep building the connections beyond show hours, which is a great idea. And no surprising, that show she's referring to is the Christian O'Connell show, who is also in and around the #1 ratings in Melbourne. Slightly older audience and different music format, but it's a good example of keeping the conversation going with the audience and bringing them closer to you. Dom says that context and familiarity are essential and a new audience will need time to get their heads around your way of doing things. They may need to have their hand held a little, which is a tricky balance when the same show is going out to an established audience who are all in on the nuances. So you've got an existing audience that know that, and a new audience is coming in, and it's kind of like trying to introduce two people at a party. I know you very well, but I don't know you very well, and you don't know each other. So you've got to think about the most polite, friendly, open, warm way to keep them being introduced to each other. You don't want the new person to feel excluded because they can't keep up with the language you've developed or those benchmarks that you have that the new people don't understand. And I say, find the most relatable thing you can attach yourself to and be part of it. A lot of content can be universal, but taking the side of a local listener is going to prove more beneficial than just assuming you know what they care about. Don't fake it, but find something to join them in with. So Kyle is unashamedly not a sports person. He doesn't like sport. But Melbourne's #1 language is AFL, Australian Rules Football. So they need to find a way to do it. Doesn't have to be Kyle, and Kyle can still hate it, but that show and that brand still has to reflect what the market is talking about. It's really important. And don't fake it. The worst thing Kyle could do would be adopt a football team, because he's already said he hates football. But what he could do is find contributors who are from the football community, as the other shows do, and bring them to be more part of the show itself. So you've got to find a way to do it. And finally, let's assume that you have a situation where you have the same show, but it's moved stations. If you inherit a show with an existing and engaged fan base, then it's successful for a reason. Understanding the relationship between the audience and the show is critical. You also need to make those new audiences who follow the show comfortable and welcoming to the rest of the station. So people might be coming in with the breakfast show because they've come with it as an audience, but you're introducing them to a whole set of other day parts where the music might be slightly different, the way you do contests is different, the way you do news is different, and traffic and other elements, and you've got to make sure it's open and accessible and clear so they understand. Irene says your strategy becomes twofold. Looking after your show's P1s, which in this instance have come from another station, and your station P1s who now have a new show to get used to. Do whatever you can to help each group feel at home with clear and simple product messaging and strong contesting. So good news about radio listeners is no matter which station you listen to in which country in the world, we largely understand how contesting works. There is a prize, you can win it. Great. But if you do some strong contesting for those people that have come across, you could call them out as welcome to the station when they come on the air and win. Any way you can to show that people are joining the station will build that momentum, and you've got to make them feel welcoming as much as you can. And that's also true of music. Don't forget music is a key part of why people are still choosing radio stations beyond the personalities as well, of course. Dom says people love personalities, not stations. A show can move to a different station. If that brand is strong enough to carry the show, as Nova's was, then the fans will follow. In this case, we also saw Jason Lauren fans championing and defending the show, craving that success and vindication for the show they know and love, and you can let your fans do the talking. Now, none of us were in the room when Jason Lauren were told they had to make way for Kyle and Jackie O, but Jason Lauren have made sure we know what was in the room when they were told they weren't good enough and they will be making way. So immediately, there's an existing fan base that they can rally to support. We were removed, we're now over here, and you'll notice that the media lines start to follow that. People are like, well, we want to get behind, dare I say it, the underdog. And for me, the number 1, 2, and 3 jobs here are marketing, marketing, and marketing. Your strategy is clear and simple. This team has a new home. Don't get too clever with the creative and make sure the new address, the frequency in most cases, is the dominant message. The worst thing that could happen is no one knows. And we've all been in those situations. I don't know if you've been in an Uber or a taxi, or you've been somewhere and someone says, oh, I like that team, aren't they on that station? And you know as a radio person, they haven't been there for 5 or 6 years. If you're moving a show, it's your job and your responsibility to tell people this show you love is now here, as simple as that. But you have to repeat that message for a longer term. It's not going to happen very early. Jason Lauren had some very early success, but they have to keep pushing that message out for years to come. Okay, so at the end of everything, when someone's taken the time to listen to you, we like to say thank you for listening, so I appreciate you taking the time. We have left a few minutes here for questions. If you'd like to know anything about the Melbourne radio market, or you'd like to ask any questions about any of the battle plans that we've demonstrated, then I would love to take your questions now. Yes. That looks like, is that Keith I can see? Hi, Keith. Oh, we're just getting a mic to you. Sorry, Keith.
All of those strategies that you're talking about applying in Melbourne, Kyle and Jackie O applying in Melbourne, they haven't applied any of them in Sydney, to my knowledge. For example, they don't run the football. They probably wouldn't have done the weather at the Sydney airport on Monday. So the show's still good enough to be number 1 in Sydney.
Yeah.
Why would it
how?
not be? Well, it may very well be how, but
yeah.
Why is that then a problem moving into Melbourne?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things working against them, Keith. The first one is that we look at Kyle and Jackie O's success over a longer term, and they weren't the number 1 breakfast show when they started. They were a great drive show, and they were a national drive show. They were moved into breakfast, as you know. So what's happened is they've had time to introduce different characters. They actually do cover the NRL, which is the rugby league in Sydney, a little bit. They've actually got one of the people on the team is the son of a former rugby league player. That's how they cover it, but they haven't done the same for AFL in Melbourne. And the quickest way to endear yourself to anyone in Melbourne, as anyone here from Melbourne knows, hi, what's your name, what's your footy team? It's the best way to do it. So the fact that they haven't even chosen to do it is probably one of the factors that we're curious about. Why haven't they? The second is, and this was pointed out to me by a very senior person at one of the networks, because we get lots of information now. We're doing the podcast where we get very well-sourced detail, is that two things can be true. One is they could be a fantastic Sydney breakfast show and an awful Melbourne breakfast show at the same time. And what they're doing by not adjusting their strategy is they are accepting that they may not be number one in Melbourne privately. Publicly, they're saying a different thing. To answer your question, I think what's happened over a long period of time is Sydney people have got used to waking up with them. And really, if you look at the research for Sydney audiences to Kyle and Jackie O, they're not really offended by too much. But Kyle can do some stuff that in 3 minutes in Melbourne forms or reinforces a perception, and they're out and they might not come back. And that's the risk. If they had started a bit softer and worked up to it, it'd be better, which is what they did in Sydney Breakfast. They didn't go full tilt early. They built it up over time, got the audience used to it, and they keep pushing the boundaries, and that's why they work. Any other questions? Another one down the front here. Is that Clayton?
It is.
Hey, Clayton. I haven't planted people in the audience. I just want to let you know. I just happen to know these two.
Following up on what you just said, wondering about the idea of, is it a legitimate play to be okay to not be number one in a second market, right? To actually long-term, 10 years, they're all right to sit in third spot, they're going to get enough revenue come through that, and that's actually okay. I know it's not the aim, but is that a legitimate play that then could be replicated elsewhere around the world? I mean, we're seeing networking, a whole lot of other things. Is that a legitimate play?
Yeah, and what you'll start seeing them talk about, and they're already starting to talk about this, is being Australia's number one breakfast show. They could be number 3 in this market, number 4 here, and number 1 in Sydney, and still be, by the numbers, Australia's number one breakfast show. Interestingly, you're starting to see some counter-interference run to that. So Nova, off the last survey results last week, have started to talk about they've got 4 of the 5 leading breakfast shows. So it starts to become, which one would you rather be in? The Kyle and Jackie O show as an advertiser, or where 4 of the 5 are number 1? I think with that too, yeah, it's a long-term game. The risk they've got, if they remove a popular local breakfast show and replace them with a networked breakfast show that does the content they're doing, they're not entering the market in the right way. Now, we all know, it's pretty much an industry secret that everyone knows about, is that the Kyle and Jackie O show will be a national show very soon, maybe as early as next year, but certainly in one of the other major markets next year. There is a breakfast show there that is popular, that will have to leave in order for them to come in. And their risk is they repeat the same strategy without adapting it. And the adaptation could be, let's not go too hard in this content too soon. Let's try and find some of the feel-good things that we do to make people feel good and give away money. Front load those things into this new market so we have a softer entrance. In Melbourne, they've come on too hard, too strong. So time will tell if they can reverse that. At the moment, they're not changing, so I'd say no. But it might be enough to be number 1 nationally. Yes?
Wait, I don't know you. You don't know me. What's the law in Australia with your social media followers? Of course, the radio station followers on the website and the social media are the property of the radio station. But when a personality has 1 million followers, do they take them with them on social media, or do they have to leave it to the station and they just die and they have to rebuild that audience with the new station?
So
how does that work?
How does it work? Yeah, so it's very situational. So Kyle and Jackie O own the Kyle and Jackie O brand, and they're very public about the fact that they lease their brand to the radio station. That's why they control what goes out on the air, despite the fact the radio station holds the license, which is risky. So Kyle and Jackie O own their brand. There are some other shows that do as well. Hamish and Andy is a good example of that. You might have seen Andy was in The Water Carrier in the Underdogs segment. Very few shows do it, but most of them then will take that social audience with them because they own all the social accounts and own all the intellectual property with that brand. But depending on the show. Jason Lauren, I would say, would have negotiated that, but I don't know for sure. But that's their brand. Yeah. Another question there?
Hi, Wade.
Is that Chris?
It is.
Hello, mate.
Obviously, I have quite intimate knowledge of a lot of this, but I reckon a lot of
Australian radio networks are watching this intently, because with rising costs and and the tough radio market at the moment, networking would be an appealing thing for them. But at the same time, do you think Australian radio markets are ready for more networking, particularly in breakfast?
Look, I think the answer to that question is there will be more networking. So the bit we can play with is, are they ready for it? It's going to happen. You know, I don't think, and it's happened as recently as last week, one of the major networks in Australia changed some of their workday lineup, and now there's just one personality who does all the Nova stations. So it's coming, it's not going to disappear, and in some ways Australia has actually been spared from a lot of the networking that has happened in other countries. So how they adjust is going to be the tell, and with the audience I think it's about how do we make sure that we're entering into those markets with more network content in a way that is still locally real and relevant. The Melbourne weather, I know it sounds strange to talk about the weather, but Melbourne, football, coffee and weather, they're the three conversations you need to be in every day. And the Melbourne weather event on Monday was so significant that schools closed, so it affects people's lives. If Kyle and Jackie O don't adapt to that kind of thing, they're making networking look bad, because they're a good show, but they're not adapting to what's happening in the lives of the audience that day. They're interested in what's happening in Hollywood and places like that. So shows that do that, even if they do that in social channels, I think, did I see Lauren from Smooth here? Hi, Lauren. Mike Perso, who hosts the Smooth Breakfast Show, went down to the beach at 3 a.m. and filmed a social media post of him with all the weather that's blowing around. Something like that just tells your audience that we're part of this, we're part of it. There are plenty of network shows that aren't in the market that still do a good job of doing local, real and relevant content to that audience. So I think to answer the question is, it's going to happen. It may be sooner than we all hope and think, and probably is already happening now. The brands that will win are the ones that make their audience feel like they still care about what's happening in their market more often, and make sure they make noise about that. I think we're nearly out of time. Just grab one question. Yes. Last one? Anders is last one.
A podcast question, actually. So
Yes.
how's this podcast been for you guys to do this? You're the new scuba diving podcast for scuba diving,
Yes.
right? So for the radio industry, you've got a podcast that's talking about itself. How's that gone?
Oh, I know. It's a little strange experience, I've got to say, a little bit of out of body, because we all know everyone who works and we're all being fed information very regularly. I'll turn my phone back on in a minute and I would have been fed a piece of information that's happening inside that we may or may not use on the podcast. What's really good though, I think, and this would be our headline, is it's great to have people talking about radio. For a long time, one of the things we've all suffered from as an industry is that people aren't talking about us enough. We know in Australia that radio commands something like 30% of listener attention. We get 9% of the revenue, and that's not good enough. So the more we're talking about radio, even in the context of a radio war, the more time it gets shown on national television, we're really happy about. We're just happy to be part of that conversation. And Kyle has made the mistake of talking about us on the air, which most of his audience wouldn't care about, but it's given us more content for us to use, so that's always good too. As I wrap up, I just want to show one last slide, Anders, if that's okay. We wanted to dedicate our presentation today to a guy called Andrew Sidwell, or some of you may know him as Bag. He was a Melbourne radio guy, but he actually did a lot of work here in Kuala Lumpur. Sadly, he passed away a couple of weeks ago from a brain tumour. He was feisty, he was funny, he was very well loved by the people that worked him, and if you had any chance to work with Bag, you'd know that. But we wanted to dedicate our presentation today to Andrew. So, Vale Bag. Thank you.